Hello students, in this video I'm going to talk to you about Lab 2, the Carbon Footprint and Sustainable Living Lab. I also wanted to show you some navigational tips for working in the classroom. You must enter the class through the table of contents. If you just stay up here in the navigation bar, you're missing a lot of the information. You're getting to the drop boxes and the places where you're supposed to do something, but you're not getting the information behind it. So right now, in Module 1, if we click on this in the table of contents, this opens, we get an introduction, and then there are these arrows here, and so you can move through the course like it is a book, and then when you log out and log back in, the course opens to the page you were reading at the time. So that's pretty helpful. As you move through Module 1, you'll eventually get to the lab information. And so we already completed the first lab, and our lab kits are on their way, but we can do Lab 2 without a lab kit. So let's take a look at that. When you open the Lab 2 here, this is in Assignments Labs, Lab 2. You get an overview, and it tells you to go to the lab manual and information module and content. This piece of page I can't change in the class, but I will try to put in the discussion and the announcements the documents that can be found there, so you'll have a little bit more redundancy to work with. But look here, number 2, you will need at least 5 days to collect data for all of the exercises. So here's a piece of information you might not have encountered if you're not reading the classroom like from the beginning to the end, using all of the information to assimilate your understanding of the course. And then eventually you'll get to this Dropbox and you'll upload your assignment. Notice also the laboratory rubric is here, and there's reference to the lab report, and the lab report are these sections of the lab activities. So you're going to write a purpose or a question. You're going to write a hypothesis. Not every activity is hypothesis driven, or like, for example, if we have multiple activities in a single lab, you might choose to respond to these rubric prompts about the more experimental component of the lab. And then in our lab documents, which we'll look at in just a second, we have the data tables and analysis questions. So those are coming straight from the lab materials. And then you're going to add your claim and evidence and reflection. And these are like the lab report pieces, basically. You've got the purpose, hypothesis, claim and evidence, and reflection. And so this is where you're assimilating what you have experienced in the lab into some succinct statements about why we were doing the lab, what kind of evidence we collected, and what your reflection of the experience is. And so that's the rubric. It's at the end of every Dropbox area. Now let's just remind ourselves, if we click on assignment, we can also get to this Dropbox. But if you just go to assignment, you never see all of that nice background information. You just hit the Dropbox. So that's why it's important to read the course through the table of contents. Now let's go find those lab manuals. Now, if I were you, I would probably just spend the day downloading these. It's not going to take a day, just like 20 minutes, right? The weird thing about these lab files is that they have terrible names, and I've asked many times for these to be corrected, but they don't get corrected. So look down in the lower left of my screen. When I hover on it, I can see the name of the lab. This one, first one, is the Research and Scientific Method Lab, but the second one is not the second lab. It's the Bioecosystem and Habitats Lab. And as we move down, we finally get to the Carbon Footprint Lab. So do yourself a favor, don't bother having to scroll through this list once a week. Just download all these files at once, because when they're open to your computer, you can see the whole file name. Every file name has actually the lab name in it. So I will put this file for the carbon footprint lab. I downloaded it using this tool onto my computer. I'll put it up in the announcements in the discussion. Hopefully you already have this. You need to get going on this lab today if you haven't already. This lab takes 5 days because you're going to do a self-op. There's minimal materials here. You can use any bag. You don't need any special tote bag. You are not waiting for your lab kit to use this lab. Do the lab right now. No lab kit needed. And then as you go through, there's a lot of background information, and take the time to read this, right? This is a lab about the carbon footprint, and basically all of the things we talk about in climate change and thinking about the carbon balance on planet Earth. Some activities and structures on Earth are carbon sinks and some are carbon sources. In our modern world, we have more carbon sources than sinks, and that means that there's more carbon in the atmosphere than is sequestered in the landscape, in the vegetation, or other inorganic materials. So when you live your life, there's this inherent balance of carbon behind it. And so we'll be collecting data about our own behaviors, and this will shed light on what the carbon balance is of our lives. So take the time to read this interesting information. Here's some stuff about your diet, for example. And then as you go through, you start to get to these tables and your exercise. So in the rubric where it references tables, analysis questions, etc., these are in the lab report, okay? We're looking at them here. So step 1, gather a large garbage bag. And hopefully I don't have to say this. Don't stop the video now and grab a large garbage bag. Read the entire lab before you get started so you know what kind of space and time you need to be successful. So as we go through, we're going to make a food diary. We're going to track our energy consumption, our water usage, and you'll be collecting these notes in data table 1 of the lab report assistant. Here's some questions, right? So in the rubric, when it references the analysis questions, those are the questions, page 13, some of them. And then we go to exercise 2, where we are reviewing the data we collected in exercise 1, and then we are answering these questions. So more questions. Please, any question you encounter in the lab, include in your lab report, which is simply a document that has the purpose, hypothesis, analysis questions, data tables and graphs, etc. that are in the lab manual, and then the claim, evidence, and reflection. So more questions, and here's the lab report assistant. This is like a document you might print out and take notes in, but I expect to see this in digital form. And then there's the questions aggregated, and we move on. So beyond what you see in this PDF file, you'll also have to add the purpose, hypothesis, claim, evidence, and reflection. The purpose of this lab is to think about the carbon balance of your life. And the hypothesis, generated from what we just experienced in the last 3 or 4 minutes of this video, might be something like the activities I engage in life have either inherently carbon sink or carbon source effects on the climate balance of the planet. Something like that, right? It's not too complex, and it's not direct hypothesis testing because we're not establishing an experiment. This is an observational study. And then the claim and evidence, might be something about your behaviors, like, oh, I think that if I ride my bike to school every day, my carbon budget will change. Now, that's an example of a claim that is just bimodal, right? Will it change or won't it change? Or you could say, if I ride my bike to school or work every day, my carbon footprint will decrease. Now, that's a directional hypothesis. So there you're saying that if A, then B will change in a specific way. And then the evidence that you have collected is the information that you collected about your behaviors. So you might summarize your consumption in data table 4, and that could be the basis of what you put in the evidence section of your lab report. And then finally, the reflection is open, right? Some of these last questions are reflective, but also this is a place where I want to hear you say, this lab was amazing and it opened my eyes, or it was really frustrating, or I wish I had known this, or it would have been cool if I could see what my fellow students came up with. You know, that's where you get to talk to us directly, and we're thinking about you as a human being doing the lab. What was your experience? All right, so once you get that all done, ideally you can submit only one document, okay? So open the PDF as a Word file, add the claim, evidence, and reflection, purpose, and hypothesis, and then you go into the assignments and you submit it. And if you had left off right here when you were reading through the course, you would find that as you logged in, you would be on this page already, and you would upload the file. I cannot open files that are dot pages. I cannot open files that are something like this, HEIC. So please don't submit those to me. Also, if you are requested to take a photo, it's great to take a photo every single time for authentication. It doesn't have to be of your face. It could just be of you, something that's going on in the lab. Include that photo in the document as well. The specific photo requirements are in the lab manual and information, requirements and instructions, laboratory photo requirements. There are no specific photos required for Lab 2, but it's just, like I said, always a great idea to just get into the practice of taking the photos. Look, Lab 2 is the only lab you don't need to submit a photo for. Why not do it anyway, just to get into the habit? All right, folks, thanks for hanging in there with me, and please let me know if you have any questions. I prefer that you email me from within the classroom. My external email is not my top priority. Being in the classroom is. Thank you very much.